I was diagnosed with an incurable degenerative corneal disease, and they told me I basically would be fully blind by 30. And I developed this naive hypothesis around ancestral living and ancestral eating. And over the course of, 6 to 7 months, it worked.
It was really shocking to me as an American how many of these chemicals are added to our food.
There are about 10,000 ingredients that have never been tested by the FDA. There are hundreds of ingredients that are banned or require cigarette-like warning labels in Europe that we freely allow here. They live 5 to 7 years longer than we do. They have significantly lower rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes. They spend half to a third of healthcare per person than we do. One of the greatest crashes was in 2000, 2001. There are a lot of similarities of that bubble to what's happening right now with AI. And when we talk about safety,
AI safety.
not only is there no incentive to do that, there is a gross disincentive to do anything that slows this down because of how much wealth is being created. If technology is consciously guided, it doesn't mean you can't make money, but it means that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. This is the podcast again where I'm having amazing spiritual teachers on, entrepreneurs, investors, scientists, because humanity has 10 to 15 years to really determine whether or not we're going to make it to the age of abundance for all. There is a chance that it's going to be all over, and it really all starts with us, with Team Humanity, on whether or not we can manifest that ability to allow love to conquer fear and make sure that AI, quantum computing, robotics, etc., serves us and serves humanity. I'm really, really excited about my guest today. This is one of my very close friends, Jason Karp, and you are going to love his story, what he's overcome in his life and what he's been able to manifest is truly amazing. Welcome back, Jason. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here. You've been in this room before.
I have.
We've done
several
a lot
times
in this room. We had Lauren and John over here showing their amazing company Evolve.
Yeah.
And they're such good people. I really appreciate you introducing me to them, and I'm a proud investor alongside you in their company. So I would love to start out just your story. The first time actually I heard your story in full was when we were at TED together.
Yeah.
And we were hosting that dinner, which was amazing. Just that whole night was amazing. But you're a rare person who actually cured what was an incurable eye disease. And I want to get into that, but why don't we just go back a little bit further and just, where did you grow up? I know that you also went to Wharton. I'm very proud Wharton alum as well.
Yeah. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut called Avon, went to Wharton undergrad, where I focused on finance and statistics. I was also a competitive tennis player and squash player growing up. I played Division I squash all 4 years at Penn. And right out of college, I went into a quantitative hedge fund in 1998. And
this was kind of the dream job, right? Because when I was at Wharton, like everybody wanted to either be a VC or a hedge fund person.
Yeah.
I was in a real rare bird trade that I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. It was kind of the heyday of investment banking.
Yeah.
And I had done a summer at what was then the kind of hot investment bank called DLJ in 1997. Most of my peers went to consulting firms like McKinsey, or they went to banks like DLJ or Goldman or Morgan Stanley. I had this unique opportunity to go to a quantitative hedge fund, and it was a real kind of gamble for me because I didn't fully know what hedge funds did. But I knew after doing a summer of intensive investment banking that I didn't want to be a banker. And I was obsessed with math and probabilities. And the job was, for the first few years, was quantitative programming and quantitative research, what you would now call a data scientist, particularly around securities and high frequency data. And a lot of the early work that I started on were the precursors to AI. And it was what they called back then were neural networks and genetic algorithms.
Yeah.
And
Machine learning.
Machine learning. Very, very early days. I mean, this is 98. And a lot of what we were researching were statistical anomalies, and we were coding algorithmically ways to trade at a time when very, very few people did this. And so it was actually incredibly lucrative, and very kind of easy to differentiate yourself because there weren't many people doing it. And it gave me just a tremendous perspective on the value of empirical science, the value of data, the value of being able to test a hypothesis with data, particularly around financial instruments. But it was a really interesting dichotomy for me because my first few years, for me, I was very successful early on and kind of did everything I had dreamed to do in terms of financial accomplishments and moving up in the ladder. They made me the youngest partner in history at the firm. But at the same time, while I thought I was kind of winning, I started to get really sick. And by my second and third year, despite what looked like on the surface, everything was going well, I started developing several diseases that manifested in my skin, in my hair, in how I felt. And then when things got really bad was when I started going blind. And I noticed it where I started seeing double out of my left eye. And I ended up seeing a bunch of different ophthalmologists in New York City. And I was diagnosed with an incurable degenerative corneal disease. And they told me I was 23 when it started, and then it was 24 when it got really bad. And they told me I basically would be fully blind by 30.
Wow.
With
It's
that,
terrifying.
it was terrifying. And it was a really dark time for me. And I think it was my first like real mental health test in life, because I was very proud of what I had accomplished. And, at Wharton, I won kind of every award you could win. I was an academic All-American and All-Ivy squash player. Like on the surface, it looked like I was like winning at life. But inside, I think I was rotting.
I mean, from the materialist perspective, you had it all.
Correct.
It's like, this is what everybody thinks
Yeah.
they want.
Yeah. And I figured out really quickly that didn't matter, because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything.
Right.
And the doctors told me that there were some pills I could take, that I could put my name on a waiting list for a corneal transplant, which was highly risky. And I kind of had this intuition that I now believe was divine, that kind of said to me, you can cure this yourself. You don't, this is something you can figure out. This is not something that you have to rely on the doctors for. And because I had no hope, in the sense that there was no cure, I thought, like, why not? And so I started doing in the same way I approach research, with data, I approached research with this. And at the time, which was 2001, there wasn't much on the internet around this. And it was sort of hard to put pieces together. And over the course of a couple months, I ended up doing a lot of research into areas around anti-inflammatory diets, around indigenous people, which I found the indigenous people research was probably the most fruitful of all the research I had done, in that you have indigenous tribes all over the world in different climates and different geographies. And one of the things that they observed, and they've still observed it today, although it's a little bit less now because a lot of indigenous peoples have been infiltrated with Western culture. But the ones that haven't been, they noticed that they had no chronic disease. and they had no obesity, no diabetes, they had no heart disease, they tended to have no allergies, and they also had shockingly low, if not non-existent, incidences of things like autism. And I kind of had this naive perspective of, and I think most Western people do, that these indigenous people are like heathens. You know, they don't have running water in many of these places. You know, they live barefoot. Like, I think modern kind of Western society views them almost like cavemen.
Right.
And yet
We were kind of taught that, actually.
And yet they're you know, on most metrics, certainly chronic disease metrics, they're far healthier than we are. And so then that made me very curious. What is it about the way they live that allows them to thrive despite lacking all modern comforts and medicine?
Right.
And I developed this naive hypothesis because I'm not a doctor. But interestingly, when I went to Penn, I was actually pre-med before I switched into Wharton. And I was always interested in nutrition and biology. And I developed this naive hypothesis around ancestral living and ancestral eating. And hypothesis was really about getting as close to nature and the least amount of processing of the food and more daily sunlight and more physical movement and more interaction with other people. And there's also a group of towns all over the world that have been documented called blue zones.
Yeah.
And the blue zones have the highest percentage of centenarians as a percentage of the overall population of anywhere in the world. And there's, I think, about 10 identified blue zones, and most of them are actually in Europe and Asia. There's one in the US. And similarly, you know, all these blue zones are sort of antiquated villages. And they eat much more naturally. They spend a lot more time outside, a lot more time walking, a lot more time napping, and workaholism's like not a thing in the blue zones. And so I started really reflecting on all of this research, and I decided to try it on myself.
Yeah.
And this was living in New York City as a young single guy, you know, in a workaholism job where, you know, it wasn't uncommon to work 100 hours in a week.
Right.
And I still wanted to succeed, but I also needed to see if I could heal my illnesses, especially my eye disease. And over the course of, you know, 6 to 7 months, it worked. And it was so profound that when I finally went into my ophthalmologist, who diagnosed, and he was actually one of the top specialists in my disease in New York City, I went in and I said, "Hey, doc, I think I cured my disease." And he said, "No, you didn't. That's impossible." And I said, "Give me the test." And thankfully, there's an objective test for my eye disease that is black and white. Do you have it? Do you not have it? And they had the before, and it's a set of images that they do on your cornea, and the disease was gone. Wow. And it was so profound for me because.
And what age were you at that point?
25.
You're 25.
Yeah. And I remember like yesterday is one of those moments in your life that you remember like changes the course of your life forever. Where he looked at the output of the scan, and I heard him whisper, "That's impossible." And then he called over his colleague and he whispered to his colleague, "You got to come see this." And the colleague also said, "That's impossible." And then he came over to me and he said, "What did you do?" And I told him, and he goes, "Nah, it can't be food."
All right.
And then he said, "I must have misdiagnosed you." And that was it.
All right.
And then and he was kind of a condescending prick about it. And instead of asking questions and being curious, he literally was just like, "There's no way that worked. I don't care what you say."
Right. It broke his paradigm, his teaching.
Yeah.
You know, that I mean, that happens a lot where people don't want to be challenged. They have their model construct and they don't want someone to puncture it.
Yeah, that's right. I would have thought he would have been really curious and been like, "Tell me everything."
Right.
And he didn't.
Yeah.
And I walked out of that office with a few kind of big revelations. The first revelation was, I don't know if I can completely trust modern Western medicine ever again. Second was to follow my intuition and start to pay more attention to that, despite it being completely unconventional. And most importantly, I kind of made a vow to myself that I was going to help others
Mhm.
around health and wellness, and that I was going to spend a significant portion of my life in understanding our toxic modern American environment and American food system.
Mhm.
And I was going to hopefully help others wake up
Right.
to the fact that we are living in a toxic soup, and that I was a canary in the coal mine, because a lot of people, and obviously you see this in the data, you know, we're the sickest we've ever been
Yeah.
in human history, in terms of chronic disease, heart disease, cancer rates are all-time highs. And then on the mental health side, we're also the worst we've ever been in terms of depression, anxiety, suicide rates,
Mhm.
and,
Loneliness.
and loneliness.
Yep.
And it's gotten profoundly worse since that was, I cured myself in 2004, and now we're in 2025, and it's much worse today.
Yeah.
And so that episode and that journey guided so much of what my life has been about since then.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. What did your parents and and friends think about that? I mean, they had to be freaking out that you were going to potentially be blind and
Well, it's a
yeah,
really interesting thing
yeah.
because, and I think I'm a lot more vulnerable, and I think secure in myself, but I didn't really tell anybody. I didn't want to scare my parents. My
Okay.
mother's like a neurotic mom, and I told her I wasn't well, and I told her I was like trying to heal it,
All right.
but I didn't tell them what the doctors
Yeah.
told me,
Yeah.
and I didn't really tell anybody. It was the kind of thing where I was very alone. I was
Okay.
very lonely about it, um, and I think I was ashamed
Mhm.
because I wanted to look like this hero.
All right.
And my trajectory from freshman year up until that point, felt like a meteoric,
Oh, yeah. Well, it was.
heroic
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
And
I mean, in the material
in
world,
the
it
material world,
was.
it was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I
Absolutely.
think I was ashamed, and I didn't want to let people know, like, on the inside, I was really suffering. And so there weren't many people that knew what I had been through. And interestingly enough, like about 3 weeks after I was officially cured was when I met my wife, Jessica. And on
Wonder.
our first date, I
Wow.
told her the story.
Oh my gosh.
And it was
I didn't realize it was on the first
first
date.
date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a
Well,
bizarre risk for me to take.
yeah. Yeah.
I think because I was just so like proud and happy that I was through it.
Right.
And, she will tell you that she thought I was like a total whack job
Right.
on
Right.
the first date, and
Yeah.
was thinking like, I can't believe this guy's telling me this stuff on the first date.
Right.
Um,
It's not exactly the first date material,
but I guess it
but
works because, we've
yeah,
been together 23 years now.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. I was lucky enough to be at your anniversary celebration. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So take me through, how you went from there to Hue chocolate, which we've been big customers of Hue since long, actually. I mean, since long before we met you.
Yeah.
I, of course, Austin native, and was so happy to meet you, and I'd meet so many cool people that are moving to Austin. I mean, it really seems like we're becoming, ground zero for the consciousness awakening
Yeah.
movement. I mean, there's so many amazing
I think
people
Austin is
moving
like
here.
is an epicenter
Yeah.
of the awakening movement. And I think I've met some of the most amazing, interesting people since we moved here.
Yeah.
So the Hugh story came out, obviously, of that journey where, after that, I significantly adjusted my diet, and I significantly adjusted how I behaved and lived in terms of what I was willing to put in my body, what I was willing to put on my body, in terms of being conscientious of, what kinds of modern poisons and toxins are in our food, our beverages, and even our, what you would call kind of personal care and household products, things like
Mhm.
shampoo and deodorant and hairspray and all that stuff. And at the time, so I cured myself. It was '02. Like, I was considered a complete crazy, like, conspiracy theorist around this stuff, because nobody was talking about how toxic all of our consumer products were.
Right.
So when I would bring it up, people would look at me like, like I was a wacky
Right.
conspiracy theorist.
Right.
And so it was pretty hard to live in New York with those behaviors in terms of what I wouldn't eat, what I would avoid, and what my kind of detox methods were. And uh, Jessica has a younger brother named Jordan, and I obviously told him a lot about what I had been through and what I was doing. And I had some books that I found to be, kind of key influences on my learning along the way. And I'd recommended a few of the authors and a few of the books to him, and he ended up, and he didn't have any of my illnesses or any of that. He ended up reading them, and he just decided like he was going to try it himself.
Yeah.
And he was going to try more ancestral living and more anti-inflammatory diets and see what happened to him. And he noticed within a very short period of time that he looked better, he felt better, he performed better, he was more alert, everything got better. And he said to me at one point, he said, "This is incredible. Like, why aren't more people doing this?
Yeah.
And why isn't there a place in New York City where we can eat this way?
Yeah.
Like, it's too hard to live this way." And he basically pitched me on this idea. So I was, at the time, I was at a hedge fund. It was before I had started my own hedge fund. And I'd been very blessed financially at that point. So I had some resources to be able to do something like this. But he basically pitched me and said, why don't we create a restaurant that's the manifestation of all these principles?
Yeah.
And we came up, and Hugh, before it was a chocolate company, was a restaurant. And we came up with the name Hugh because Hugh stands for human. And I
love the branding. Yeah.
Our guiding slogan was "Get back to human." And because my journey and all my research and all the ancestral intelligence is that we don't live in a way that's consistent with human thriving anymore. And we have to get back to closer to nature to do it. So that's where the name came from. And the restaurant was a very risky proposition. Restaurants, I was a professional investor for 23 years. I guess I technically still am now, but all I did was research companies, and I knew that restaurants were very risky businesses, very difficult. And I also was humble enough to know we didn't know anything about restaurants. We just knew what we wanted. And we hired a few consultants who knew a lot better than we did about what to do and what not to do. And it took us a couple of years of business planning to come up with this restaurant concept, which was it was kind of like a paleo or ancestral style, almost like a food court. It wasn't like a sit-down restaurant with servers. And I really give credit to Jordan for convincing me to do it. And he basically said he would quit his job. He was in real estate, and my wife had just stopped, and we just had our first child, and they were like, Jordan and Jessica would basically operate the restaurant. I would fund it. And it was, the timing of it was terrible, which was I was starting my own hedge fund also. And we had no outside investors. And part of the reason we had no outside investors was because it was a cockamamie idea. It was ultra premium food with, everything that needed to be organic was organic. All the animal products were wild or sourced in a way that was evolutionarily consistent with how those animals. So the beef was grass-fed, grass-finished. The fish was pole-caught and wild. Same thing with the chickens. We had some exotic animal meats, and there wasn't anything like it. And so I knew that investors would basically be like, "This is crazy. You guys have no track record." And so we kind of took a shot. And in the beginning, right before we launched, we also had a gluten-free, grain-free bakery section that had things like cookies and banana bread and scones and muffins, and we needed chocolate chips for the baked goods. Yeah. And when we went to go find chocolate chips that met our strict ingredient guardrails, we couldn't find any.
Right.
All the chocolate chips that you could find for scaled food service had genetically modified cane sugar, had certain chemical emulsifiers in it. And we said, wow, we have to make our own chocolate for the chocolate chips in the baked goods.
Right.
And then, through a lot of trial and error, we came up with our own version of our own chocolate. And Jordan said, this is so good, we should turn them into chocolate bars and we should sell it in the restaurant.
Right.
And it started off basically as handmade chocolate that we sold in the restaurant. And those sold like hotcakes.
Yeah.
And we couldn't keep them in stock. And they were very expensive. And they weren't very expensive because we were trying to make money off them. They were very expensive because it was very expensive to make.
Right.
And they were $10 a bar originally. And when I saw the volume in the first like couple months, I said to Jordan, I said, I think this is a separate business.
Right.
And like we should lean into the chocolate part of the business. And then we got a lucky break where one of our chefs, his girlfriend worked at the Columbus Circle Whole Foods location. And she was what was called a local forager, which was Whole Foods used to have local foragers before Amazon bought it.
Yeah. It was one of the best things about Whole Foods.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Where they'd go to these like random local things and they'd say like, oh, that's a local product. We want it in the local store.
Right.
And it didn't have to meet the national regulations of a national product. And she said, this is the best healthy chocolate I've had. Can we sell it at Whole Foods? And we said, sure. And that's how Hue Chocolate was born.
Right. Right. Wow. That's so cool. And then obviously Hue Chocolate just took off like a rocket.
Yeah.
At that point. So just walk me through that. Like it took off and then you guys exited.
So what happened was we had the restaurant and the restaurant was profitable after like the first 6 months. The first 6 months was an unmitigated disaster, by the way. Like there were no fewer than 5 times where I had anxiety attacks, where I would say to Jessica in the middle of the night, like, we have to shut this down because it was so much more money than I had anticipated in terms of the ongoing funding required. It was losing a staggering amount of money in the first 6 months. And I just couldn't handle it. But for whatever reason, we stuck with it. And then the restaurant turned profitable. And then the restaurant became very profitable. And we used the cash flow of the restaurant to finance the chocolate. And then, probably about 3 years in, we realized it was not just a family business. We realized like we needed like real operators, and we hired some real people who came from consumer packaged goods, who came from industries that knew what they were doing. And, we did our best to hire great people. And then eventually, probably around 2017, 18, Hue became the #1 premium chocolate in the country. And at that point, we started getting some inbounds from interested suitors who saw that Hue Chocolate had metrics that were unprecedented in the industry. And it was still small, but there's certain KPIs in consumer packaged goods. Like one of them is, they call it velocity, which is how many units per store per week you sell. And that's a very important KPI. And we were 3 or 4 times above anything else.
Wow.
And our prices were way higher, which was also unusual.
Yeah.
And so we had some KPIs that were really interesting to the suitors. And then through some serendipity, we ended up taking Mondelez, the largest snacking company in the world, the company that owns Cadbury. We brought them on as a very small minority investor to help us think about international expansion. And then at the beginning of COVID, early 2020, another one of the other largest chocolate companies in the world came in with an unsolicited bid for the whole company. And it created a bidding war. And we ended up, at that point, we had outside investors. My family and I still own the supermajority of the business, but at that point we had a fiduciary responsibility to our investors. And it ended up being the highest valuation for a food company in history.
Right.
So we had to take it.
Yeah.
And it was bittersweet. I think some people looked at me and were like, of course you're going to take it.
Did you just make a chocolate joke there? It was bittersweet.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did.
True.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, I'm
such a fan of the chocolate.
That was not an intended pun.
Yeah.
But it got, there was a lot of luck there. The timing was perfect. And as a financial investor, like I was obviously wise enough to determine that this is a unprecedented multiple.
Amazing.
And so we exited and sold it to Mondelez in 2021.
Yeah.
And then before the sale, in late 2018. So I had my own hedge fund from late 2011 until the first quarter of 2019. So call it 8 years. And at that point, I'd been in the hedge fund industry for about 21 years. And I had noticed I had a great run. I had really only 2 down years in that entire 20-year period. And I really started to burn out. And I kind of noticed as Hugh was growing, and it started probably 2016, that I felt like my soul was rotting. The hedge fund industry is basically a glorified video game. And honestly, I think most investing is. And there's a lot of ways that I think people rationalize it as like something that's adding a lot of value to society. And I think if you're actually helping build companies and finance, things that help humanity or society, like that's a great purpose of investing. But the bulk of investing that I was familiar with, which was public markets, equities, most of it's just a glorified video game. And I got very good at that video game.
Yeah.
But I felt like I was watching what was happening with Hugh, and I was watching what was happening with my hedge fund. And obviously my hedge fund was far more lucrative. Hugh wasn't even making money at that point. And we were getting profoundly touching emails and letters and anecdotes from people about how Hugh changed their life. And I mean, unbelievable letters of people who thought they couldn't eat, delicious food ever again. And when they discovered Hugh, they realized they could. And I never got letters like that running a hedge fund. And I just felt like this intense urge that I wasn't helping people. I was just getting rich or getting richer. And I felt like I was surrounded by a lot of darkness.
Yeah.
And the show Billions was based on where I worked.
All right.
And it was modeled off of the firm where I worked.
That's a pretty dark show.
And it's a really dark culture.
Yeah.
And it's all about basically pushing pieces of paper around and arbitraging, financial instruments to make money. And it's super materialistic in terms of the hedge fund lifestyle, in terms of planes and boats and mansions and all that stuff. And in the epicenter in New York City, I felt like it was really gross for my kids. I felt like it wasn't who I was. I felt like I was becoming someone that I didn't want to be. And it took me 2 years too long to finally pull the trigger and realize that I should retire. And it was very hard because, at our peak, we were managing $4.5 billion of assets. And it was an enormously large amount of management fees and fees. I had a big firm. I had 40 people working for me. It felt very powerful to be in that position.
Sure.
And it's very hard to just like turn that off.
Yeah.
And walk away from what's basically like a large annuity. And
you're being told that you're winning in the material world.
Correct.
And in the world of form, that constant, feed of like, I'm winning.
Yeah.
It's hard to walk away from.
It's very hard. But I was deeply depressed. And it was the second period after my eye disease when I went into like real clinical depression. And it was when, my financial outward success was peaking. And it was another moment to look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, like there was a moment, and I talk about this from time to time, where at the end of 2015, there's like an award ceremony for best hedge funds. And it's kind of like the Oscars for hedge funds. And we won 3 awards that year, including best new hedge fund of the year. And, you get these beautiful glass trophies, and it's this huge event, and it's, pictures and everything. And after I won that award, I felt this immense hollowness. And I said to my wife privately afterwards, I said, I don't think I can do better than this.
Yeah.
And she's like, what do you mean? And I had heard from one of my mentors before, who was a multi-billionaire, and was always depressed. And he said to me at one point, he said, I got to the top of my mountain and there's nothing to see. And that stuck with me.
All right.
And I sort of like, I never thought that was possible, because at the time I was much younger when he said that to me, and I was like, come on. But then I got there, and I got to the top of my mountain, and there was nothing up there. And I felt this immense, like vacuum. And then shortly thereafter, one of my best friends and my business partner of 16 years, he killed himself. And it was, I think the darkness of what we did got to him. And he was very financially successful also. And the combination of his death, and me sort of feeling like I kind of peaked and couldn't do better, put me into this really existential, like dark night of the soul depression. And that lasted for years.
Wow.
And it culminated in my decision ultimately to return our investors' money, retire, which was at the beginning of 2019. And then I said to Jessica, I said, if I'm getting out of this, I want to really get out of this. I don't want to be in the same circles of people. I don't want to be in like the same atmosphere. And we chose Austin because it was so different from New York City. And it was also the epicenter of health and wellness. Whole Foods is headquartered here. And I knew I wanted to lean into Hugh and grow the health and wellness part of what I wanted to do in my life. And that was the inception of why we created HumanCo, which is what I do now. And it's a health and wellness like holding company. Think of it as a mini conglomerate where we buy, build, and invest in businesses that are trying to make the world a better place. And so that was the sort of switch into Austin.
Yeah, and the most famous brand for that, of course, is True Food Kitchen, which is one of our favorite places to eat. Yeah, it's amazing story. I mean, one thing that really resonates in the story for me is that you had this ability to really be in tune with your soul and get the divine inspiration to A, change your diet and save yourself from blindness. And B, then had that same ability with your soul to say, I got to get out. Because if you hadn't have listened to that, I think it would have been really dark.
I agree. Yeah, look, I believe that when humans feel profound psychological pain or depression or anxiety, that's a signal from the universe that you have to change. And I think that pain will persist until you change.
This is in Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, what Viktor Frankl's biggest fear was is that people would medicate that pain away. And that they wouldn't grapple with their soul in terms of what is their meaning in this lifetime? What are they supposed to do?
And that's what we do as a society, right? Where we over-medicate everything. And, and we don't get to the root causes of all of the various forms of disease. And I've been spending a few years on this topic that we call the metacrisis, which is the intersection of like probably the three greatest crises of human history, which is the crisis of physical health, mental health, and planetary health. And I think addressing the root causes of the metacrisis actually have a lot of the same answers, but it requires an ability to deal with the pain in a way that requires change instead of band-aiding it.
So I want to talk about just how significant this problem is in the United States, because you educated me on that, and I know you became famous recently for holding up the 2 boxes of Fruit Loops, and the red dye ban now is in effect. But it was really shocking to me as an American, as a proud American, born and raised here in Austin, how bad this problem is and how many of these chemicals are added to our food that are totally illegal in Europe and Canada and other places. So
I'll try to keep it abridged because we could talk about this one for hours. And this is where I spend a lot of my time, particularly on some of the policy work I've done, with people like RFK Jr. So it's much worse than I think most Americans realize. And thankfully in the last 6 months, a lot of it has come to light. But as an example, there are about 10,000 ingredients that are added to our food and I'd call it consumer product supply, which includes things like lotions and makeup and hair products, etc. That have never been tested by the FDA.
Okay.
And that comparable number in Europe is 400.
Wow.
So Europe has a much, much stricter set of regulatory standards on what they allow into the consumer products. And it's basically stuff that's man-made, right? So the U.S. developed a policy about 50 years ago called generally recognized as safe, which was it had good intentions. And all these things, like any Frankenstein movie, started with good intentions and then ended up as a horror movie. And they created the generally recognized as safe regulatory approach to basically allow ingredients that we knew were obviously safe to be put into food products without additional testing. And this was stuff like salt and baking soda, where you didn't have to like retest that kind of stuff. And then the FDA got very overwhelmed and started allowing companies to do something called self-certification, where if you are an enterprising company and you're developing a new food product, you could hire several independent experts, in quotes, who could create in a laboratory a new preservative or a new colorant or a new chemical that changes the taste profile. And your independent experts could rubber stamp it, say it's safe. They send that to the FDA. The FDA recognizes that the experts are experts, and then they rubber stamp it, and then boom, it's in our food supply. And it could be as quick as 3 months. Europe, by contrast, has what's called the precautionary principle, where they assume everything is guilty until it's proven innocent. And if a company or a laboratory develops a new man-made chemical, they require up to sometimes 10 years of testing before it's allowed. And America did this as a way to sponsor and encourage innovation so that we could basically develop cheaper and cheaper and more accessible and more shelf-stable foods. But because the profit motive is so strong, it generally didn't comport with the good intentions. And there's many, many books on this that talk about how like Doritos is incredibly scientifically engineered to addict humans in terms of all the things that were synthesized and created in laboratories, were added to the product that make it, more taste better, more shelf stable, and most importantly, more addictive.
Yeah.
And this has proliferated across every industry. And it also, it's not just the food additives, it's also things like certain herbicides and pesticides that are banned in many countries. And so there are hundreds of ingredients that are banned or require cigarette-like warning labels in Europe that we freely allow here. And some of them have fairly conclusive evidence that they're harmful, carcinogenic, inflammatory. Some of them they haven't tested enough to know. But what we do know, and this is really where the Make America Healthy Again movement has had so much legs, is that Europe, and broad Europe, and that includes, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, they live 5 to 7 years longer than we do. They have significantly lower rates of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and by the way, they smoke way more than we do.
Yeah.
They're also much happier than we are. And then most importantly, so they have all of the key health metrics that they're far better than America on. They spend half to a third of healthcare per person than we do. So they're healthier and they spend way less money than we do.
All right.
And that's over hundreds and hundreds of millions of people over decades. So the evidence is overwhelming.
Right.
And I think what I've been trying to advocate for is they care more about their people than they do about profit. And we care more about profit than we do about our people. And they have plenty of highly profitable companies and plenty of public corporations that are doing great. but there is an inherently um, more humane approach
Right.
to protecting its people than we have in this country.
Yeah.
And I think we're finally starting to address it. But the epidemic of cancer and disease in this country is so alarming that it's literally existential. And we don't, and the healthcare cost is so overwhelming. I mean, we spend upwards of $5 trillion on healthcare, and somewhere upwards of 90% of that is in self-inflicted, lifestyle-related disease that we know could be prevented or cured through some of the lifestyle changes that cured my own eye disease.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's stunning. And, not most Americans don't travel over to Europe. Actually a shocking number of Congress people have never actually been outside of North America.
Yep.
But those that do have the financial resources to do so, they always report back. They feel so much better.
Yeah.
Like when they come back here, like just being exposed to that diet, even for a week,
Yeah.
will make their bodies start to heal.
Yeah.
And it's really sad in a country like this, which has the biggest GDP, that we don't take care of people.
Yeah. And I think it's even more flagrant than that because it's not like they're eating salads all day. Like you go to France, you go to Italy, they eat bread with every meal.
Yeah.
They eat a lot of like indulgent items and dairy and cheeses.
Yeah.
They have sweets.
A lot of butter.
Like they're not, I mean, they're eating a lot of indulgent foods. And initially, and there's different terms for this. One of them is called the French paradox. But initially, we kind of chalked it up to, well, they walk more than we do, and they eat less than we do. But we've discovered that most of the answer is actually not that. It's actually what's in the food. And it's not just about the calories. It's about the chemical burden that we have. And it's traceable and it's detectable in our blood in terms of glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in Roundup. It's the most used herbicide and pesticide in this country, is highly, highly carcinogenic and toxic. There's been billions and billions of dollars of settlements of lawsuits already, and many countries ban it, but it is allowed here. And it's just one of many, many chemicals that we as Americans use for better crop yields and cheaper prices. And there hasn't been kind of a moral imperative from our leaders to say, I don't care if it makes the food more profitable. Like, we shouldn't poison each other for money.
Yeah.
And that's literally what we've been doing. And so I feel like we're in a deep spiritual crisis as well.
Yeah.
Because we've lost our way in terms of what matters.
Right.
And we have become so obsessed as a country. And I say this from someone who was like at the epicenter of one of the most capitalistic activities ever, which was hedge fund investing. And I think we as a country have lost our way in that we value progress in terms of money, corporations, inventions, and things that feel good in terms of how we measure progress. But I think our understanding of what really matters in life has been lost.
Yeah. This is a really important discussion and something I'm super interested in. I'm very careful with what I put in my body. Deborah is too. And, I feel great as a result. And I agree with you on all counts here. Let's take a bit of a diversion into this age of abundance for all. Let me first just describe it for you,
Please.
in terms of how I'm thinking about it. So I think that the accelerating forces of AI, quantum computing, robotics, will create an age of abundance even for countries like Chad. So one of the things I talked about on the first episode is my Uber drive with a really kind gentleman, Calabu from Chad, who I started to look on ChatGPT to learn about Chad because I didn't know anything about Chad.
Yeah, I don't either.
Chad is number 187 out of 189 on the Human Development Index. It has a GDP of $660 a person. Ours is around 85,000 or so in the U.S. And it's really impoverished. I mean, really, really impoverished. And Kalabu was just this beautiful, bright soul who he is saving up for the next 6 to 7 years of his life, sending almost all of his money back to Chad, to his wife and children who live there, his parents, who think that he's rich.
Right.
And he's like, I live in this land of abundance in America. And he's saving up to get them to move here in the future so that they can live there. And it was during that drive where it really clicked for me. And I was like, who's going to take care of Chad? The only way we create abundance in a place like Chad is through things like robots. Like then, think of an NGO 10 years from now where these technologies have accelerated to a point where you could have an NGO go in there with $10 million and 10,000 robots and go build the clean water pathways, go build the electrical supply they need, from, obviously it will be solar energy, go and, build the healthcare systems they need, et cetera. And if you can create an oasis in Chad, like you could create an oasis anywhere in the world. And I think that that's where we could go as humanity. There's lots of risk to it, but that is what I mean by the age of abundance for all. And so I'd just like to ask you, do you think that is even possible for humanity in this lifetime? Like I see that we'll be there maybe 10 to 15 years from now if we make it. We'll get into if we make it.
Look, I obviously grew up with technology, and I'm like a techno nerd like you. And
yeah, we've had our share of techno nerd conversations.
And like all my favorite movies growing up were sci-fi, and I certainly believe it's possible, and I certainly believe that technology can be used as a force for incredible good. I think my concern around AI is how it can be used for bad.
Yeah.
And
I, of course, have that same concern.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not looking at this with just rose-colored glasses. Like,
and
terrorists will be able to use AI to create great destruction. But my bet is that many more human beings will fight that great destruction as we approach the age of abundance for all.
Yeah, look, I think my broader concern is even if 99.99% of the technological evolution is for good, AI has the capability, if even that 0.01% uses it for bad, of destroying humanity. And I've spent, as you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about, and look, like, I come at this from a few different perspectives. My first job when I started as a quantitative analyst and kind of researcher was one of my first projects was in 98, 99, which a lot of investors today were not actively investing or alive for that period. And it was the internet boom. And one of the things that and it was also one of the greatest financial calamities, which was the long-term capital management disaster. And they wanted me to study, and there wasn't a lot of research on it at the time because it was like the beginning of the internet, was the history of manias and bubbles. Because the internet created at the time, what was the greatest bubble we'd ever seen, in terms of financial valuations, in terms of excess, in terms of people extrapolating that the internet's going to change the world, which it obviously did, by the way. And we can't even imagine a world without the internet now.
Yeah.
But
you and I are in a generation that is the last generation that will remember the world without
the internet. That's right. Yeah. And there was a time when, like, if in 99, I remember this, where if you were like a regular company and you decided to put .com in your name, your stock went up 100% the next week.
Trust me, I lived through the height of that and the pain of that.
And then obviously, one of the greatest crashes was in 2000, 2001. And there are a lot of similarities of that bubble to what's happening right now with AI. And that's just the financial part of it. And what happened with long-term capital and what happened with there was a lot of fraud that happened in 2000, like Enron and WorldCom, that also contributed to the crash. But what financial markets are notorious for being terrible at is estimating unforeseen risks, and either grossly discounting them or not even imagining what they could be. And that also happened in the 2008 mortgage crisis. And if you go back in the history of financial markets, every bubble and every crash was the same pattern, but with something new that was world-changing. And then people realized that there were a lot of things that they didn't properly handicap or consider.
I still don't get how tulips were going to change the world.
Yeah, well,
that's
tulips
a whole
was
different
a crazy
thing.
one.
Right.
Yes, but it obviously happened in the 20s.
Right.
There was a period in the 70s when it happened. There was a period in the 80s when it happened, and so there've been a handful of times. And then you go back to even the times of the tulip mania. And so I became really, really good at trying to understand, what Karl Popper calls the black swans, which Nassim Taleb has popularized the book, The Black Swan.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of unknown unknowns. And how can you think about those if it's never happened before? And how do you balance that with the obvious? And I still do a lot of investing in financial analysis. A stat that caught me off guard, this was last week, and I think I might have sent it to you, but there's 498 private AI companies now that are unicorns, that are bigger than $1 billion.
You did send this to me. Yep.
These are all private companies that collectively are worth $2.7 trillion. And 2 years earlier, that number was like 10 billion. And so call it 2.7 trillion of value has been created, most of which is not even generating revenue yet. There's obviously some amazing examples like OpenAI and Anthropic. But the amount of revenue they're generating and the lack of profits and what they're burning doesn't anywhere close to account for the $2.7 trillion of value, and the amount of projected profits that would have to be generated to justify the 2.7 trillion is so large that it's almost unimaginable. And so we're definitely in an extreme bubble. This bubble could persist for another 2 years. The thing about bubbles is they always go longer than you think. And I think because of that staggering amount of wealth creation, it's created staggering incentives to keep going. Yeah. And when we talk about safety and
AI safety,
yep. And what are the things we won't allow and what are the things that we're going to constrain? Not only is there no incentive to do that, there is a gross disincentive to do anything that slows this down because of how much wealth is being created. And that's just in the US. Yeah. And then when you compare the arms race that we're doing in the US to the other countries like China and Russia, nobody in the US is going to want to slow down because they don't want Russia and China, to leapfrog like what we thought was happening with DeepSeek, to leapfrog above us.
Right.
And so my greatest concern is how do we create some incentives to be more thoughtful about this? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the risks that are there have been talked about, like the article you sent me from Mustafa. And obviously you and I have been exchanging really good articles on some of the warning signs that AI is demonstrating, yep, where it's lying or where it's reprogramming itself to survive, or it's trying to blackmail the engineers, yep, or, it's already demonstrating self-interest and self-preservation. And what my bigger concern is I've also spent a lot of time studying humanity. And humanity has in its past a lot of darkness and a lot of terrible behavior. And we're training all of these models on the summation of everything that we've ever written. And within that conglomeration of everything that's ever happened, there's a ton of darkness. And there's a ton of darkness that actually worked for that time.
Right.
You know, what Hitler did, what Genghis Khan did, like there's, and so if we're training all the models on things that if the data sets possess a lot of darkness, and humanity itself, as optimistic as I am on our ability to thrive and survive, I'm also, you know, pretty reasonable and I'd say like pragmatic and understanding that humanity has some darkness inside of it, and has done things from time to time that are just profit-seeking, or, you know, or occasionally are nihilistic, or occasionally are actually downright evil. And I just don't know if there's enough things being put in place to protect against, you know, the very, very small number of people that could design the greatest bioweapon, or could do something with nuclear, or could just decide that, like, you know what, there's too many oligarchs and there's too many billionaires, and I want to destroy the financial system. And, you know, you were the one that told me that, you know, you could take a bunch of those new NVIDIA boxes and take them off grid,
Yep.
And jailbreak them,
Yep.
and kind of just design some pretty nasty stuff that you would normally think of would be in a Bond movie.
By the way, we now have in this household 5 open source large language models running on a computer that allows us to query things that we should not be able to know, that would not even be legal on ChatGPT.
Right.
And you know, not that we have a nefarious intent, obviously.
Right.
I'm just curious, like how fast is this moving? And so I know that's not going to make you feel at ease, but it's but you know, I'm really exploring this because I'm thinking a lot about how does the light overcome the dark?
Yes.
Because you know, part of what I believe, and, you know, as you know, I'm deeply spiritual. I know you're deeply spiritual, is that it is within humanity's grasp for the ancient prophecies, which you can look at as mystical or metaphorical or both, that heaven and earth would merge.
Yep.
Like, I think it's this lifetime. And, you know, I wrote a short story this week called God's Final Exam, which, you know, thank you for reading it and encouraging me on that, you know, where it was an optimistic vision of how we make it together to that age of abundance for all. And, you know, I'm putting it all on the field. I mean, this next 10 years of my life really matters. And, you know, I'm not alone and you're not alone. There's a lot of people bringing the light, you know, Reid Hoffman's bringing the light, Eric Schmidt's bringing the light, Mustafa Suleiman's bringing the light, Dimas Hassibis, Dr. Fifili, Mira Murati. I mean, there's a lot of people that really care. You know, Henry Kissinger's dying book was Genesis.
The last chapter.
That last chapter was Henry Kissinger's dying message to humanity, pleading for us to make it.
I think it's our greatest test.
It is our
in human
greatest
history.
Test. Yeah, it is God's final exam. Is my word.
I'm getting the chills as I'm saying it, because I think it's our greatest test.
It is.
And I think, and I think there's actually a lot of parallels to what I've been working on with the food system, but this is much more consequential. Whereas
there are parallels. For sure.
Because we failed the test.
Yeah, I mean, the poisoning. Here's the parallels. I'll give you the parallels. Because this is, I mean, you know, I know a lot about tech, right? And you know a ton about food, and so you can educate me a ton on that, and you have. We are poisoning ourselves through social media.
Yes.
The algorithms are seeking our basest fears to keep us enraged so that we constantly keep clicking.
Yes.
To sell ads to us. Meta made $45 billion in profit last quarter.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg is going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on an AI data center that's as big as Manhattan, all of Manhattan. And these profits are gained by these algorithms seeking our basest fears.
Yeah. And effectively enslaving us.
Yes. And so we are, just like we're poisoning ourselves with diet, we are poisoning our minds with this content. And it is like a Matrix moment. I know you and I are both fans of that movie, where humanity has to break out of the shackles of that Matrix. Now, I think I'm more optimistic than you. I mean, we should talk about this. Like, probabilistically, I'm 95% certain that humanity does make it to this age of abundance for all. I'm not being rose-colored glasses in my book on how hard it's going to be. Like my book, which is again, Love Conquers Fear, Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All.
Yeah.
I'm being really clear-eyed on how rough it's going to be at times. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people just freaking out alone on job loss.
Yeah.
And all the retooling that's going to be required.
That's one of my huge concerns, actually, is the job loss and people's lack of purpose.
Yeah.
And even if, and I don't buy the universal basic income idea. Like, I don't think we'll ever be able to pull it off.
I don't buy it, and I don't think it'll be necessary, because when we get to this, when we can see across the horizon the age of abundance for all, and I think we're going to be able to see it. We're going to be able to glimpse it, almost like an astronaut, like seeing on the other side, across the planet. We're going to see on the horizon, wow, there's a future available to us where we can choose to end disease.
Yeah.
Where we can choose to have infinite food abundance of the highest quality foods. We can have infinite water abundance. We can have nearly unlimited energy, which everything starts with energy. That humanity is going to have to make a big choice. And we have free will. God has given us free will.
Yeah.
And that choice is going to either be, let's go ahead and go for it and grab that future and allow love to conquer fear. And it's a tall order, because, we've been locked into a scarcity mindset for millennia, and this fear-based mindset and this zero-sum game of, like, if we get AGI before China, we're going to subjugate them. If they get AGI before us, they're going to subjugate us. I mean, fear is a powerful motivator. Right now, there is a lot of fear around that. And most people don't really realize, I agree with you on some of the aspects of the bubble. I think like 95% of AI companies are probably going to go out of business, because most of them are just not going to make it. And I think that maybe for a different reason than you, I think this space has a Microsoft Windows problem, where it's like, hey, Jason, nice app you have there. Sorry, it's just part of Windows now. That's what OpenAI and Anthropic, they're going to grow to a point where they're going to make most of these apps totally irrelevant.
Yep.
But some of them are going to have durability. I've got a thesis on which ones will be durable.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that.
And so, we're going to be able to hopefully grasp that. And it is going to be our biggest test. And, if we make the choice of just death and destruction, then it is all over. And it's sad, because it's all over in this lifetime.
But this really faces us. I don't think, the reason I think that let's just call them, for simplicity, the dark forces. I don't think, surely there's going to be some bad people. There always are. And I'm sure we're going to have a couple like real wake up moments. And unfortunately, history usually requires pain for us to learn. Right. And requires, some forms of regulation, to alter incentives and alter behavior.
Yeah.
I think the bigger issue, and I know you are also a big fan of John Mackey and conscious capitalism.
Yes.
I think if technology is consciously guided, and the way I kind of think about what is the definition of that, it's putting people first. It doesn't mean you can't make money, but it means that you're not going to make money at the expense of people, which means that there are a lot of businesses that wouldn't exist, like social media, the way it is, because we know how deleterious it is, particularly for kids.
Yeah.
And that would entail a shareholder revolt, right? If Meta came out and said, you know what, like Mark said, I now have a conscience. I no longer am going to do this because I see what it's doing to humanity, and I'm going to completely like turn down the algorithm, and it's not going to be optimized for time anymore. Like, and the stock went down 50%. Like he would get fired, right? And then the board would get fired, and then they would hire people who wanted to make money again. And this is why we're here with the food industry, is because there have been, and I've met some of them, like Indra Nooyi, who was the chairman of Pepsi and considered one of the greatest female CEOs of all time. You know, she told me and talks about it in her book that she tried to make Pepsi a much healthier company. But when they started going into lower margin products that didn't make as much money, the board revolted and shareholders revolted. And then people get fired. And then when people get fired, they hire people who will do it.
Right.
And that's the same conundrum with tech.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to figure out is, how do you get, and it almost has to be like a collective agreement.
Yes.
That we're going to prioritize humanity first. And it might slow down the profitability of these companies. It might slow down the pace of innovation. But I think it's necessary, because what I have witnessed firsthand is the profit motive is too strong in this country.
Yeah.
And there's such a glorification of the Elon types, of the multi-billionaire who works 100 hours a week and doesn't spend time with his family and builds multiple companies, and develops a lot of cool shit. And obviously he's done some really amazing stuff, but that's the hero right now. And as long as that's the hero, then kids aspire to be like that hero. And it creates this positive feedback loop where it's really hard, you know, to give weight to the heroes that are maybe being a little bit more conscientious, but they're not building stuff as fast. It's not as profitable. It's not worth as much, because we don't have enough things that we're measuring, right? Like money and market caps are quantifiable, whereas, you know, people's happiness is a much more fuzzy metric.
Yeah.
And even people's health seems to be a much more fuzzy metric. And so what concerns me is that the economy and ecosystem that we're in is so money focused and so profit focused. And I don't think Donald Trump is helping that. That it's really hard to become more conscious about how we guide technology, because I think what Mustafa said that was so on point was that we shouldn't be building AI to become like a person. We should be building AI to help people.
Right.
And that's a very important distinction.
It is. Yep.
And it's probably less profitable in the near term if it's just to help people than it is to do all the other things that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I there's a lot to unpack in that. I mean, you know, first of all, we don't know what consciousness actually is.
Right.
I mean, we just don't. I mean, trust me, I have read so many books at this point trying to figure out what consciousness is. And I've watched so many videos by people that purport to have a theory of consciousness. We don't know what it is.
Right.
I, you know, really believe, both through, you know, psychedelic journeys, through meditation, that we for sure have a soul.
Yeah. I agree with that.
That there is a Brett, and then there is a deep soul that is eternal, that has been here for many lifetimes. And I know that I was born with this purpose to do everything I could to help humanity with technology. I've known my purpose actually since I was 7 years old. And I can't tell you how lucky that makes me feel to have had a mom to help me find that at that age.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And you know, I honor what you're doing, brother. I mean, in terms of your purpose, I mean, really to stop poisoning ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Stop poisoning. It is, our purposes are intertwined.
Yeah, they really are.
I'm trying to make sure we stop poisoning ourselves in a different way.
Yeah, they're different vectors of the same problem.
They're different vectors of the same problem. And they're both rooted in your and my deep love for humanity.
Yeah.
You know, to want to help put it all on the line to save humanity, you have to actually love humanity. And I had a dinner over here.
And you have to love humanity more than money.
You have to love humanity more than money. And I had a dinner over here actually with Mark Gober. I was talking about this with Mark on the podcast where, one of the participants at the dinners, we got in this big debate about could AI ever become conscious? And I had some of the most amazing entrepreneurs, amazing technologists over here to discuss that. One of them said, well, I've seen what job humanity's done, and it made my heart hurt. It literally, I felt it in my heart.
Yeah.
Because that person, it felt like they had given up on humanity.
Yeah.
Let the machines take over. Like, we've done a horrible job.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that also made my heart hurt was when Elon Musk put out that tweet where it went something like, humanity is nothing more than a biological bootloader for the future of digital superintelligence.
Right.
And I just couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that. Like that's basically saying we're nothing but a stepping stone. We don't matter.
Yeah.
And it's just, it really just takes all the divinity away from what humanity actually is.
Well,
and
that's
all the
symptomatic
ancient
of
spiritual traditions.
It's symptomatic of the bigger problem. The fact that he said that, because I think a lot of people would agree with that. And I think there's two things that I wanted to bring up. The first that we'll come right back to is how do we define abundance, which I think is a really important question. And to make sure that we don't define abundance in terms of just GDP, right?
Yes.
And the second one, which is a thought experiment I've posed to a lot of people, and I'd love to do this on a very large scale, where if you polled in America anonymously, so nobody would actually have attribution.
Yeah.
And you said to, let's just say 1 million Americans that were adults or college age, and say, you could develop a chemical that upon the development of it, you would be granted $1 billion into your bank account, tax-free. But you knew that it would slowly poison humanity over 20 years. Would you take the $1 billion? And I've done this in groups. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people would take it. And I think like that's like a really interesting thought experiment to test part of the problem, right? Which is so many people and companies, whether it's the big food companies or it's Mark Zuckerberg, what they're effectively doing is they're making profits today, and the social costs they're not bearing directly.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the food companies. Like we talk about this with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. We know without doubt that soda is extremely harmful to people's health, right? But they don't bear the costs of diabetes, and they don't bear the cost of the healthcare burden, and they don't bear the cost of the cancer rates. And they know now, similar to the cigarette companies, that it actually causes all those things.
Right.
But they're still going.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like how, and so now this dovetails into abundance, which is there a way, and I know John Mackey's tried to do this, and the basis of conscious capitalism is like, how do you define returns that aren't just stock returns, that are stakeholder returns, and how do we define abundance as a society so that it's not just, do you have a big house?
Right.
Or can you afford to put food on your table? Which of course is a basic human need. And I'm not minimizing that. But we need to start defining abundance in terms of happiness. And in terms of connection.
It's more like a Bhutanese definition, the gross domestic output.
Because ultimately, I always ask, like, what are we optimizing for? Like, the reason I think people want to get rich and want to get power and want to build stuff, I think everyone wants to ultimately belong, and they want to be happy, and they want to feel at peace.
Well, they're also, when we're born as babies and we're those beautiful little divine souls that, you put in a crib. If you put two babies in there together, they don't care if you're Muslim, Jew, or black, white, or male, female, or, come from this family or that caste or this caste. All they're just beautiful divine souls. And part of what I'm addressing in my book, part 3 of my book, is on transformation. How does humanity transform?
Yeah.
And part of what I'm addressing in there is there's a lot of deprogramming that we have to have.
Yeah.
And
unlearning.
Unlearning. And a lot of our suffering is from programming.
Yeah.
And we are programmed from a very young age in this world of form, especially, here in America, which again, I love many things about America. We are programmed at a very early age where it's like, you got to have this type of body and you got to get, this type of money. And, it's all about like having that type of car and that type of house. And, the only true happiness, like the only lasting happiness only comes from the inside. And all the ancient scriptures agree with that.
Yeah.
Whether it's Christianity, the kingdom of God is found within you, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism. I mean, I
Everything.
just actually finished the Gita,
Nice.
which was amazing. The version with Stephen Mitchell as the master translator and spiritual teacher is incredible.
I need to read that.
I mean, it is
I read that in college, but I wasn't.
It does have the caste system kind of right up front in chapters 1 and 2 of the Gita, which I completely reject, but there's so much in it that's very divine. And it really was the original exploration of self,
Right.
of the self, the seed of the soul, as Gary Zukov would call it. So in terms of waking humanity up, there's definitely a lot of there's definitely a lot of techniques. I mean, one of the things we talked about in Austin is there is this consciousness awakening going on, and we're kind of ground zero for it. How do you see that kind of playing out? Like, what do you think humanity could do to collectively wake up from the world of form?
I think about this all the time. Sometimes it's so overwhelming that you almost want to like give up because it seems like such a huge problem. And the way I think about it in a few different ways, but one of the ways is I think we have to get to a lot of people of power and a lot of leaders.
Yep.
Because the people of power and the leaders have the most, like if you think about it in terms of like nodes and cascading effects, the people of power have the most influence to change society the fastest. And just imagine, for example, if the kind of awakening that you went through or the awakening that I've gone through, if you took, Putin, Trump, Elon, Zuck, Xi Jinping, and you put them through that awakening, and then you call it the top 20 CEOs in the United States, and you put them through that awakening, how that would then trickle down and manifest into the world, both into the economy as well as into public guidance and regulatory approaches and how to conduct society. I think getting to the leaders and the people of power is of paramount importance, because I don't think we have time to do it completely bottom up. And there is indeed a grand awakening that is happening, and it's slow, but it's accelerating right now. And it's happening in a lot of the areas that I'm watching. It's obviously happening with health right now, which is kind of what the Maha movement's trying to do. It's happening in some areas that used to be called conspiracy theories. But, in areas about like the JFK assassination and the RFK assassination and, what they attempted to do with the Epstein files, and what I think what's happening, and it's also happening with UFOs, as you know, or what they now call UAPs, where there have been a lot of lies that we've been told for decades that many people used to think were conspiracy theories. It turns out to be true.
Right.
And as people start to realize that we shouldn't just accept what we're told and assume it's truth, and they start thinking for themselves, it causes this sort of broader awakening around like, am I doing what I should be doing in life? And am I doing what brings me fulfillment? And should I just trust what my daily activities are? And oh my God, I've been enslaved by social media. And I think that's happening slowly, but it's not happening fast enough because, as you know, most people have very busy lives. They have to pay their bills. They have families. They have to pay their mortgage, they have to go to work. And so most people, whatever little time they have left for thinking has been consumed with media, and kind of mind-numbing entertainment.
Right.
Whether it's Netflix or it's social media or it's, a football game. And people don't spend time really talking and thinking anymore about like, what is the purpose of life and what's going on and how did we even get here? And like, what the hell's going, so it's, I would approach it, from starting with what I call the hypernodes, which are the people that have the greatest kind of cascade ability to propagate, and trying to find those hypernodes, trying to get them to see what you've seen.
Yeah.
Whether it's through psychedelic work or through deep meditation. Unfortunately, if I were a betting man, and I usually am, I think it's going to take some shock and awe, bad things, to really wake people up. And that's, if you look at the history of financial markets, or anything catastrophic that's happened, it's usually those kinds of things, right? Where we realize like, oh shit, like we needed, Nagasaki and Hiroshima to see what that did for us to realize like, oh shit, like
Right.
that's a lot worse and more powerful than we thought. Like
Yeah.
we need to regulate nuclear in a very strict way. Because had that not happened, who knows what would have happened to
Yeah.
the world. And I think we are in store in the next 10 years for this gradual ascent into abundance, but punctuated with some horrific incidents where, like COVID, where we realize like, oh shit, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the policies to be able to deal with, if somebody decides to code a robot that goes rogue, and takes out like a group of people, or God forbid someone develops a bioweapon using AI. Like, and I think unfortunately we're going to be tested with some significant catastrophic events in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think we should just be prepared for it, because I think it's almost inevitable. If you just look at the history of humanity, like we are now endowing the bad people with the greatest weapon in human history, which is AI.
Yeah. It's the greatest producer and the greatest
and
weapon
potential
at the
greatest
same
weapon.
time.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be necessary, unfortunately, to really wake up the global leaders to come together and be like, oh wait,
Yeah.
like we went too far. Now we gotta put some stuff in place. And I just think there's going to be some more wake up moments that are coming, where the government reveals, just as we're revealing now, on some of the stuff with food and chemicals, about how toxic they actually have been. And the data's there to support it now, where people are now like, again, I'm using my background, but when I first started talking about the fact that all these global food companies make a safer, cleaner ingredient version of the same product in other countries. So they sell a much more toxic version of Fruit Loops here in America than they do in Europe. Like, the super majority of Americans didn't know that.
Yeah.
They didn't even know. So now they're like, wait a minute, they sell a better, safer version of all these things in Europe, and we don't have access to that version
Right.
in America. That's a little form of waking up.
Yeah.
And I just think we're going to need a lot of those kind of things collectively.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I explored in that short story, God's Final Exam, is that the collective wake up actually could happen through humanity glimpsing the divine. That, one of the things
Well, that would
posed-
certainly do it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I posed, right, with Dr. Alexander Bliss was the main protagonist. And he had this crazy idea to basically hook up people to a brain to computer interface type technology, which I called Neurofire in the short story, to record everybody from the Dalai Lama to deep meditators to people doing psychedelic journeys, and put all of that data together to create a picture of source, of heaven.
Yeah.
And then he had this big reveal at the Telluride, documentary festival. It's called the Mountain Film Festival, to show it to humanity. And the awe was, it was just like, wow, this is actually our reality. Like, we're not just in this world of form. There is something, when I think about your story when you were starting, I just finished this book, Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, which is an incredible book. It's about this guy who takes people through deep regression and hypnosis to find out what is the source of their suffering. And it's usually in a past life.
Yeah.
And he then takes all these case studies and looks for the commonality to create the pattern recognition for what is source and how does the reincarnation process work. And the whole time you were talking, I was thinking about, wow, Jason's soul decided to incarnate in this lifetime, knowing that you would face this disease that people would tell you is incurable.
Yep.
And then you would have the free will to make a choice in terms of how you dealt with that.
Yep. And
you made the right choice, clearly, and cured the disease and got the dream girl and all the things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, had a home run with you, and, now are on this mission to really help the world and help heal the world through the poisoning that we're putting in our bodies. And I don't know. I mean, do you have a thought on that? I mean, in terms of reincarnation, I'm sure you've thought about that too. Have you thought very deeply about
Look,
the
I
fact
think
that you were incarnated for this purpose?
Oh yeah. In fact, in some of my journey work, I've been told as such.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've been able to access what some call other realms. If we can go a little woo here.
Yeah, sure.
Through meditation. I spent a week at the Monroe Institute where, and a lot of the Monroe material is accessible online, where they show you how to get into these altered states without medicine, where you can experience some of what people experience in their near-death experiences, and all the books and all the literature. And I think a lot of people underestimate how much evidence and how much science there is around the reincarnation and souls and what people see and witness. And Mark Gober talks about this a lot. But one of the things I always think about is, how do we get more people to experience that? Because as you and I have experienced directly, when we try to talk about this to the hardcore, let's call them arrogant scientists, they're not even open-minded. And it's so opposite to their worldview that sometimes when I even try to talk about it to those types, they speak to me with disdain, that like I'm crazy. And so what I've kind of come to the conclusion is that a lot of people need to experience it themselves. And there's no way that we can convince them with words or convince them with narratives or stories or even film that this is real.
Yeah.
And so then I wonder, well, how do we provide them an opportunity if they're not willing to do psychedelic work or go to Monroe for a week? How do we provide them with that opportunity? And one of the reasons that I invested in Evolve, which for your viewers is still in early days, but it is a headset. It's a VR headset with more biometric sensing equipment than anything that's ever been developed as a consumer device. That will effectively train you in a accelerated way to do what the Zen Buddhists have done, where you'll be able to reach some of those altered states without medicine, using almost a gamified set of meditative practices that the device will enable. And if that device becomes accessible to many, and there are modules in that device that just take a half hour, 20 minutes that will allow people to achieve that. Now, all of a sudden, when we speak to those skeptical folks who've never experienced the divine, you can say, hey, I have a red pill for you, and it doesn't require you doing a psychedelic journey. And it's this device.
Yeah.
And go, just do it. See for yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if you study, you're familiar with Brian Muraresku and his book, The Immortality Key.
Yep.
And I think that book, which was a New York Times bestseller, has some of the most important principles around this, which was that, he, with extremely thorough research and support, basically proved that through actual archaeochemistry, where they went to some of the archives and tested some of the ancient chalices that were used in what was called the Eleusis, where the ancient Greeks, they would have an initiation ritual, and it was for the leaders, and the leaders would have to go through this fairly long ritual and initiation process that culminated with a trip to Eleusis. And at Eleusis, they would drink out of a chalice, and it was a special potion that they called the kukion. And the kukion, which they were able to prove, had elements and residual of ergot. And ergot is the fungi that's the basis of LSD. And the purpose of the initiation wasn't for them to hallucinate.
Right.
The purpose of the initiation was, you're going to be a leader of some kind. And, Plato and Aristotle and Socrates all went through this. And we need you to see the divine before you're a leader.
Yeah.
You need to witness what human life is really about before you are put in a position of leadership. And for millennia, this was a tradition that was practiced in a bunch of cultures that required this kind of initiation. It's still done by many indigenous communities. But because of our modern society, that's never going to happen in like today, where people have to go through like proper initiation rituals. And so the question that I grappled with was, is there a technological way that we can create an initiation?
Yeah.
And I think Evolve could be one of the ways to do it.
Yeah. I have great hope and faith that, whether it's Evolve, which, thanks to you, I'm an investor in as well, or it's other companies, that AI will actually accelerate our ability to know how to do this without medicine.
Great. AI could be a great use
I
for
really
that.
think, I think that we are going to have an explosion in material science. I mean, if you look at what Google has done with DeepMind, with AlphaFold, and now AlphaFold 2, in terms of solving the protein folding problem, we are just scratching the surface in terms of how much humanity is prioritizing this race, which again, we agree it's out of fear, but there are good things that can come out of the race. And one of the things that I think will come out of the race is the understanding of exactly how these compounds work to allow you to see the divine.
Yes.
And I think it's just a matter of time where we can't treat it as taboo anymore, though, because the studies, I mean, it was a big deal here in Texas, and I'm hosting a dinner for former Governor Rick Perry on this front. It's a big deal in Texas that this ibogaine
Huge deal.
research passed to
huge deal.
save our vets.
Yeah.
Well, would be a much bigger deal is like really understanding, like fundamentally, why this plant that grows in West Africa works to reset the brain to permanently cure a suicidal vet or an opioid addict.
Right.
Like, let's figure that out. That seems like a good pharmaceutical like focus. Now, they don't tend to be in the cure business, but I think that we will get in the cure business whether or not, pharmaceutical companies want us to get in the cure business because of how much is going to progress so fast.
Well,
So,
I think
we'll see.
I think another related use of AI, which is what Evolve is going to try to do, is we have a lot of brain imagery that's been done in laboratories. There's a great research lab out of Harvard that's been studying lifelong meditators who are kind of always in the other realms. And they can't quantify what it means to be in the other realms, but there's very specific brain and physiological markers in terms of your EEG and what they call functional MRI of what happens to your brain when you move out of kind of waking consciousness. And they know what that looks like on, in terms of studying all these lifelong meditators. And I think AI will be a really useful tool to reverse engineer. How do we get into that state
Yes.
in a faster way without having to meditate for 10 years?
Right.
And that will be another way that people will be able to kind of move out of the material
Yeah.
temporarily without psychedelics.
Yeah.
And my wish would be that if this gets developed in a way where it's more approachable, that all future leaders, whether it's leaders of corporations or leaders of countries or leaders of states, have to go through this.
Yeah.
And they have to just see like what you and I are talking about, and not view it as just mystical mythology.
Yeah. 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 Because I mean, it's the most beautiful discovery of all, in that we're not just locked in a world of form. I mean,
Yeah.
how amazing is that? Well, this was amazing, my friend. I just love your soul. I really appreciate all that you put in the world. I love how you've really inspired me over the years. You know, the path I'm on right now is in no small part to, you know, you inspiring me and putting that in me and
Oh, thank
believing
you.
in me.
Yes.
And it really means a lot to me. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, well, it's been, I really treasure our friendship, and I treasure you coming into my life. And I've been so blessed and fortunate with the beautiful people that I've met in Austin, who are all finding their own path to the same goal.
Yeah.
Which is what is life really about.
It's so cool. I mean, I feel so lucky because, you know, being born here and seeing the city I grew up in become this is just outstanding, and really so happy you and Jessica moved here and your beautiful kids, and really looking forward to the next 10 years together. It's going to be intense.
Yeah.
But here we are. Team
It's our
Humanity.
greatest test, but it's our opportunity to survive and thrive through the test.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining for another episode of Love Conquers Fear. This was a fantastic episode. There was so much that we learned, and I really appreciate all the energy Jason's putting out there to really help humanity. I usually ask the question at the end, you know, what are you doing to really put it all on the line to help? But I think that's pretty obvious from listening to him. And stay tuned for a lot more episodes. There's a lot in the queue, and it's pretty incredible who's going to be joining the podcast very soon. So thanks everybody for tuning in.